I'm Elena Harrison, 34, an elementary school teacher. The birthday candles were still smoking when my mother pushed back her chair with that familiar scrape against our hardwood floor. The sound cut through the lingering echo of "Happy Birthday" like a blade through silk, and I felt my stomach drop before she even opened her mouth. "We don't have time for this," Mom announced, her voice carrying that particular brand of dismissal I'd grown up hearing whenever my needs inconveniently intersected with her schedule. She was already reaching for her purse, the leather strap sliding over her shoulder with practiced efficiency. My sister, Sarah, let out a snicker from across the table, the kind of laugh that had haunted my childhood, sharp, knowing, designed to make me feel small. "Seriously, Elena, a Tuesday afternoon party? Some of us have real responsibilities." I watched my 9-year-old son Marcus stare down at his untouched slice of chocolate cake, the Superman candles we'd carefully arranged now reduced to waxy stumps. His small fingers gripped his fork so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and I could see the way his shoulders had drawn up toward his ears, that defensive posture he'd inherited from me, the one that said he was trying to make himself invisible. The dining room felt suddenly cavernous despite being the same modest space where we'd shared countless meals. The afternoon sunlight streaming through our sheer curtains seemed too bright, too cheerful for what was unfolding. I could smell the lingering sweetness of vanilla frosting mixing with my mother's heavy perfume, white shoulders, the same scent she'd worn for 30 years, and it made my throat tight. "Mom," I started, but she was already moving toward the front door, her heels clicking against the floor with military precision. "Your father's waiting in the car," she said without turning around. "You know how he gets when we're late for his doctor's appointment." It was a lie. Dad's appointment wasn't until Thursday. I knew because I'd written it on the calendar hanging in their kitchen just last week when I'd stopped by to help Mom organize his medications. But calling her out would only make things worse, would give her ammunition to use against me later in one of those phone calls where she'd tell me how difficult and ungrateful I was being. My brother-in-law Mike was already standing, brushing invisible crumbs from his polo shirt. "Thanks for the cake, Elena." "Really?" His tone suggested he was thanking me for a root canal. "Come on, kids. Grandma's ready to go." My nephews, 7 and 5, scrambled from their chairs without a backward glance at Marcus, their cousin who'd been so excited to share his special day with them. They'd barely touched their cake either, too busy playing games on their tablets to engage with the party activities I'd spent hours planning. Sarah paused at the doorway, her expression softening just enough to give me hope. For a moment, I thought she might say something kind, might acknowledge that this was her nephew's birthday, that maybe we could salvage something from this wreckage. Instead, she shrugged. "Maybe next time plan it for a weekend. You know how busy everyone gets." The front door closed with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if she'd slammed it. Marcus hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, staring at his cake like it might hold answers to questions he was too young to know how to ask. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the gentle hum of our refrigerator and the distant sound of car doors slamming in our driveway. I wanted to say something, anything, to make this better. To explain why his grandmother and aunt and uncle and cousins had just walked out on his birthday party 10 minutes after we'd sung to him. To tell him it wasn't his fault, that some people just didn't understand how to show up for the people they claimed to love. But the words felt too heavy, too complicated for a 9-year-old who'd just watched his extended family abandon him on what should have been one of the happiest days of his year. Instead, I reached across the table and covered his small hand with mine. His skin was warm and slightly sticky from the frosting he'd been nervously picking at, and I felt him relax just a fraction under my touch. "Mom?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yeah, buddy? Did I do something wrong?" The question hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. I looked into his dark eyes, so much like his father's, the father who'd walked out on us 2 years ago with even less ceremony than my family had just managed, and felt something shift inside my chest. Something that had been bending for years finally snapped. "No, Marcus. You didn't do anything wrong." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Not a single thing." He nodded solemnly, the way children do when they're trying to be brave about things they don't understand. "Can I go play in my room?" "Of course." I watched him slide off his chair and pad down the hallway in his new birthday sneakers, the ones with lights that flashed when he walked, the ones he'd been so excited to show everyone, the ones that now seemed to blink sadly in the dimmed afternoon light. Alone in my dining room, surrounded by the detritus of a failed celebration, crumpled napkins, half-empty juice boxes, a birthday banner that suddenly looked garish and desperate, I felt the familiar weight of disappointment settle over my shoulders like an old, unwelcome friend. But underneath it, something else was stirring. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd been avoiding for months. My finger hovered over the call button as I listened to Marcus moving around in his room, probably changing out of his party clothes and into something that didn't remind him of today's humiliation. The phone rang once.
Twice.
Elena? The voice on the other end sounded surprised. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Hi, David. I took a deep breath, tasting the lingering sweetness of birthday cake and the bitter edge of my own resolve. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. There was a pause, and I could hear the familiar sounds of his law office in the background. Phones ringing, muffled conversations, the constant hum of a world that moved forward whether you were ready or not. What's going on, Elena? You sound different.
Different.
That was one way to put it. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a drop I'd been too afraid to take for years. But watching my son's face as his own family dismissed him had pushed me past fear into something sharper, more dangerous. I want to know about the trust fund, I said, my voice cutting through the afternoon, quiet like a confession. The one my grandmother left me. The one Mom's been managing since I turned 18. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, sharp and urgent, as if it sensed the shift in the air. Elena, David said finally, his lawyer voice carefully neutral. What exactly has your mother told you about that trust? The way he asked the question, cautious, probing, like he was testing the depth of water before diving in, told me everything I needed to know. My hands started to shake, and I had to grip the phone tighter to keep from dropping it. She told me there wasn't much left. That grandma's medical bills ate up most of it before she died, and what remained barely covered the funeral costs. Another pause. Longer this time. Elena, I think you and I need to have a conversation. A long one. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? The birthday cake sat forgotten on the table, its cheerful frosting roses wilting slightly in the warm afternoon air. Through the window, I could see my mother's car pulling out of the driveway, taking with it any illusion I'd been clinging to about family loyalty and unconditional love. But as I watched them disappear around the corner, I realized I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry, and for the first time in my adult life, I was ready to do something about it. I'll be there at 9, I told David, and hung up before he could respond. In his room, Marcus had turned on his radio, and the soft sound of his favorite song drifted down the hallway. He was humming along, his voice sweet and unbroken despite everything that had just happened. Despite everything that had been happening to us for years while I stood by and let it. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where we'd hung streamers this morning, where Marcus had helped me set up the folding chairs we'd borrowed from our neighbor Mrs. Chen. The decorations fluttered in the breeze like abandoned prayers, and I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. Tomorrow morning, I was going to find out exactly how much my mother had stolen from us. But tonight, I was going to make sure my son knew that someone in this family was finally ready to fight for him. I was reaching for my laptop when I heard the sound of a car door slamming in my driveway, too soon for my family to have made it to wherever they'd claimed to be going. Through the front window, I could see a figure walking up my front path, someone I hadn't expected to see for another 6 months. Someone who wasn't supposed to know where we lived. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, and I felt my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Through the peephole, I could see him clearly, tall, lean, wearing that same charcoal gray suit he'd worn to our custody hearing 2 years ago.
James.
Marcus's father. The man who'd signed away his parental rights without so much as a phone call to say goodbye to his son. My hand froze on the deadbolt. He wasn't supposed to be here. The restraining order had expired 6 months ago, but our divorce decree was crystal clear about contact protocols. Any communication had to go through our lawyers, and he certainly had no right to show up unannounced at our home. The doorbell rang again, followed by a soft knock that somehow felt more threatening than if he'd been pounding on the door. "Elena, I know you're in there. I saw your car in the driveway." His voice carried through the wood, calm and reasonable in that way that had once made me feel safe, and now made my skin crawl. "I just want to talk." From down the hallway, I heard Marcus's bedroom door creak open. "Mom? Who's at the door?"
My throat went dry.
James didn't know about the birthday party, couldn't know, unless someone had told him. The timing felt too coincidental, too perfectly calculated to catch us at our most vulnerable moment. "Stay in your room, buddy," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll handle it." I pressed my back against the door and pulled out my phone, scrolling to David's number. My divorce lawyer had become more than just legal counsel over the past 2 years. He'd become the closest thing I had to a friend who understood the particular hell of dealing with James's manipulations. But before I could hit call, James spoke again, and his words made my blood freeze. "I heard about the trust fund, Elena. About what your mother's been doing." The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. How could he possibly know about something I'd only just learned myself? Something I hadn't even fully confirmed yet? "I know you're confused right now," he continued, his voice taking on that patient, condescending tone I remembered from our worst fights. "I know you're probably feeling betrayed. But you need to understand, your family isn't the only one who's been keeping secrets from you." My legs felt unsteady. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my back pressed against the wood, trying to process what he was saying. The afternoon sunlight streaming through our front windows suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. "What do you want, James?" I managed to call out. "I want to help you. I want to help Marcus." There was a pause, and I could hear him shifting his weight on the front porch. "Elena, your grandmother's trust fund? It's worth more than you think. A lot more. And your mother, she's been using it to pay for things that have nothing to do with you or Marcus." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath my feet that had characterized so much of my marriage to this man. James had always been good at finding my pressure points, at knowing exactly what to say to make me doubt everything I thought I knew about my own life. But this time felt different. This time, he was confirming suspicions I'd already started to have. "How do you know about the trust?" I asked. "Because I've been investigating it for months. Ever since I found out about Marcus's medical bills last year." My eyes snapped open. "What medical bills?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Marcus had been healthy, perfectly healthy. His last checkup had been routine, no issues, no concerns. What medical bills could James possibly be talking about? "Elena, open the door.
Please."
This isn't a conversation we should be having through wood." Every instinct I had screamed at me to keep the door locked, to call the police, to protect myself and Marcus from whatever game James was playing now. But the mention of medical bills had shaken something loose in my memory, a conversation with my mother from last spring, something about insurance paperwork and claims that needed to be filed. Something I'd trusted her to handle because I'd been drowning in my own responsibilities as a single mother working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. "You have 5 minutes, I said, standing up and turning the deadbolt. "And if you raise your voice even once, if you do anything to upset Marcus, I'm calling the police." I opened the door just wide enough to see his face clearly. 2 years had aged him. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his dark hair was showing gray at the temples. But his smile was the same one that had charmed me in college, confident and slightly predatory. "Thank you," he said, stepping back to give me space. "I know this is unexpected. That's one word for it." I kept my hand on the door, ready to slam it shut, if necessary. "Talk." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers. Last year, your mother filed insurance claims for Marcus. Expensive ones. Therapy sessions, specialist consultations, diagnostic tests. All for conditions he doesn't have. The folder felt heavy in my hands as he passed it to me. I flipped it open and saw photocopies of insurance forms, all bearing Marcus's name and my mother's signature as his guardian. The dates went back 18 months, covering a period when I'd been working double shifts at the school and picking up tutoring jobs on weekends to make ends meet. A period when my mother had offered to help with Marcus's after-school care, to take him to routine appointments, so I wouldn't have to miss work. ADHD evaluations, I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Behavioral therapy. Occupational therapy for sensory processing disorder. I looked up at James, feeling sick. He doesn't have any of these things. No, he doesn't. But the insurance company paid out over $40,000 in claims. Money that went directly into an account your mother controls. The papers fluttered in my shaking hands. $40,000. Money stolen using my son's name, my son's identity, while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to provide for us honestly. Why are you telling me this? I asked. What do you want? James's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. I want my son back, Elena. I want to be part of his life again. And I think you're going to need help dealing with what your family has done to you. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the front porch like fallen leaves. Insurance forms and medical reports and evidence of betrayal so deep it made my chest ache to breathe. You signed away your rights, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Rights that can be restored if circumstances change significantly. If, for example, it comes to light that the custodial parent has been the victim of financial fraud that impacts her ability to provide for the child. The legal implications hit me like a physical blow. If my mother had been stealing from us, from Marcus, for years, if I'd been struggling financially while money that belonged to us sat in accounts I didn't even know existed, it could change everything. It could give James grounds to challenge our custody arrangement. You planned this, I whispered. You've been watching us, waiting for the right moment to. I've been trying to protect my son, he interrupted, his voice taking on an edge I remembered from our worst fights. While you've been letting your family steal from him. The accusation hung in the air between us like a slap. Because as much as I wanted to deny it, as much as I wanted to defend myself, there was a terrible truth in what he was saying. I had trusted my mother. I had let her handle things I should have been managing myself. I had been so grateful for her help that I never questioned why she was suddenly so willing to give it. Mom? Marcus's voice came from behind me, small and uncertain. Is that Dad? I turned to see my son standing in the hallway, still wearing his birthday shirt with its cheerful Superman logo. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, were wide with confusion and something that might have been hope. James stepped forward, and I saw his face transform as he looked at his son for the first time in 2 years. Whatever else he was, manipulative, calculating, dangerous, he had loved Marcus once. I could see it in the way his expression softened, in the way his hands trembled slightly as he raised one in a tentative wave. Hey, buddy, he said softly. Happy birthday. Marcus looked between us, his 9-year-old mind trying to process why his father was here, why I looked like I'd seen a ghost, why there were papers scattered all over our front porch. I thought you didn't want to see me anymore, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. The words hit James like a physical blow. I watched him close his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I never stopped wanting to see you, he said. Never. I made some mistakes. Big ones. And I've been trying to fix them. I felt trapped between them, between my son's desperate need for his father's love and my own certainty that James was using that need to manipulate us both. The afternoon sun was starting to slant lower, casting long shadows across our front yard, and I realized that neighbors were probably starting to notice the scene playing out on our doorstep. We can't do this here, I said finally. Marcus, go back to your room. Your father and I need to talk. But Mom. Now, Marcus. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my tone must have warned him off. He disappeared back down the hallway, and I heard his bedroom door close with a soft click. James was watching me carefully, and I could see him calculating his next move. Elena, I know you don't trust me. I know I gave you every reason not to. But your family has been stealing from you for years. From Marcus. And if you don't do something about it, they're going to keep doing it. And your solution is what? Let you back into our lives? Give you another chance to destroy us. My solution is to help you get back what's yours. What's Marcus's? He gestured to the scattered papers. I have documentation going back 5 years. Insurance fraud, trust fund mismanagement, forged signatures. Enough to put your mother in prison if you want to press charges. 5 years. The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. 5 years of struggling to make ends meet while my mother sat on money that belonged to us. 5 years of working double shifts and skipping meals and lying awake at night worrying about how I was going to pay for Marcus's school clothes, his birthday parties, his future. What do you want in return? I asked because with James there was always a price. Joint custody. Shared decision-making. A chance to be Marcus's father again. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I thought about my son's face when he'd seen his father, the hope that had flickered there despite everything. I thought about the birthday party that had ended in humiliation, about my family walking out on us without a backward glance. I thought about the trust fund I'd never known existed, about the medical bills filed in my son's name for conditions he didn't have, about the years of financial struggle that might have been unnecessary. I need time to think, I said. James nodded, but I could see the impatience flickering behind his eyes. Of course. But Elena, don't take too long. Your mother knows I'm here. She knows what I've found. And if she decides to move the money before you can stop her? He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The threat was clear enough. I was bending down to gather the scattered papers when I heard the sound of another car pulling into my driveway. Through the trees, I could see the familiar outline of my mother's silver sedan, moving fast enough to suggest urgency. She's back, I whispered. James straightened, his expression hardening. Good. It's time she answered for what she's done. But as my mother's car door slammed and I heard her heels clicking rapidly up our front walk, I realized this confrontation was about to become something much bigger than I was prepared for. Something that would change everything one way or another. And standing there on my front porch, clutching evidence of my family's betrayal while my ex-husband waited beside me like a predator scenting blood, I had no idea which side I was supposed to be on anymore. My mother appeared around the corner of our front walk like a woman possessed, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled and her lipstick worn off in patches. She moved with the kind of desperate urgency I'd only seen from her once before, the day my father had his first heart attack and she'd driven 90 miles an hour to the hospital. Elena, get away from him, she called out, her voice carrying a note of panic I'd never heard before. Get inside the house.
Now.
James stepped protectively closer to me, and I felt caught between two forces I didn't fully understand. The insurance papers were still clutched in my hands, evidence of betrayal that made my mother's sudden appearance feel less like maternal concern and more like damage control. Hello, Patricia, James said, his voice calm and measured. I was wondering when you'd show up. My mother's eyes darted between us, taking in the scattered papers on the porch, the manila folder, the way James was standing just close enough to me to suggest alliance. Her face went through a series of expressions, surprise, fear, calculation, before settling into the mask of righteous indignation I knew so well. You have no right to be here, she said, climbing the porch steps with her chin raised. Elena has a restraining order. That expired 6 months ago, James interrupted smoothly. And I think Elena has a right to know what you've been doing with her son's medical insurance. Don't you? The color drained from my mother's face so quickly I thought she might faint. She gripped the porch railing, her knuckles going white, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw her look genuinely afraid. I don't know what lies he's been telling you, she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Elena, honey, you can't trust anything this man says. He abandoned you and Marcus. He signed away his rights. Because you told me Elena was better off without me, James said, and there was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. Because you said you'd make sure Marcus was taken care of financially if I stayed away. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my mother, waiting for her to deny it, to explain how James was twisting the truth the way he always did. But she just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Mom, my voice came out smaller than I intended. Is that true? Elena, you don't understand the whole situation. Then explain it to me. I held up the insurance papers, my hands shaking. Explain why there are medical claims filed in Marcus's name for conditions he doesn't have. Explain why you've been managing a trust fund I didn't even know existed. Explain why I've been working 2 jobs to keep us afloat while you've been sitting on money that belongs to us. My mother's composure finally cracked. She sank down onto our porch swing, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. It's not what you think, she whispered. Then what is it? I demanded. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Your father's medical bills. The real ones, not the insurance fraud. His treatments, the experimental therapies that insurance wouldn't cover. We were going to lose the house, Elena. Lose everything. The confession hung in the air like smoke. I felt James tense beside me, and I realized this wasn't the answer he'd been expecting either. So you stole from your grandson, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. I borrowed from the trust. I was going to pay it back, I swear. When your father got better, when we got back on our feet. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. But he kept getting worse, and the bills kept coming, and I didn't know what else to do. What about the insurance fraud? James asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. The fake medical claims? My mother's face crumpled. That was Sarah's idea. She said it was just borrowing from the insurance company, that they had so much money they'd never miss it. She said everyone did it, that it wasn't really stealing if we were desperate. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was somehow worse than simple greed. My family hadn't just stolen from us. They'd convinced themselves they were justified in doing it. They'd rationalized their way into fraud and betrayal, all while watching me struggle to provide for my son. How much? I asked. How much is left in the trust? My mother wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. About 200,000, maybe a little more. The number hit me like a lightning bolt. $200,000. Enough to pay off my student loans, to buy a house, to secure Marcus's college education. Enough to change our lives completely. And the insurance money?
Gone.
All of it went to your father's treatments. I felt James shift beside me, and I could practically hear him calculating the legal implications. Insurance fraud was a federal crime. Even if the money had gone to legitimate medical expenses, the way it had been obtained was still illegal. Elena, my mother said, reaching for my hand. I know I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I was trying to save your father's life. I was trying to keep our family together. By destroying mine? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was past caring about her feelings. By letting me think I was failing as a mother because I couldn't provide for my son the way I wanted to? I was going to tell you. When your father got better, when things settled down, Dad's been in remission for 8 months, I said, my voice rising. 8 months, Mom. When exactly were you planning to come clean? She didn't have an answer for that. We all knew why, because she'd never planned to tell me. She'd planned to keep the money, to keep the secret, to let me go on struggling while she lived comfortably on funds that belonged to Marcus and me. From inside the house, I heard Marcus's bedroom door open. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, his face pale and confused. Mom? Why is everyone yelling? Why is Grandma crying? The sight of my son, innocent, trusting, still wearing his birthday shirt, broke something open in my chest. He'd already had his party ruined by family members who couldn't be bothered to stay for cake. Now he was watching his grandmother fall apart on our front porch while his estranged father stood by like a vulture waiting to pick over the remains. Come here, buddy, I said, opening my arms. Marcus ran to me, and I pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and the lingering sweetness of birthday cake. Over his head, I looked at my mother and James, these two people who claimed to love us, but had spent years manipulating and betraying us in different ways. I want both of you to leave, I said quietly. Elena, my mother started.
Now.
Both of you. I need time to think, and Marcus needs time to process all of this without an audience. James looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have warned him off. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. We still need to discuss custody arrangements. We don't need to discuss anything until I decide what I'm going to do about all of this, I replied. He nodded curtly and walked back to his car. My mother stood more slowly, her movements stiff and uncertain. Elena, please. Don't let him poison you against your family. We made mistakes, but we love you. We love Marcus. If you loved us, you wouldn't have stolen from us, I said simply. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but she didn't try to argue. She walked to her car with her shoulders slumped, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. As both cars pulled out of our driveway, Marcus looked up at me with those dark eyes that saw too much for a 9-year-old. Are we in trouble, Mom? I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, trying to find words that would be honest without being terrifying.
No, buddy.
We're not in trouble, but some things are going to change. Good changes or bad changes? I thought about the trust fund, about the money that could transform our lives. I thought about James's return and what it might mean for our custody arrangement. I thought about my family's betrayal and the legal battles that might be coming. I don't know yet, I admitted. But whatever happens, we're going to face it together. Okay. He nodded solemnly and hugged me tighter. Can we finish my birthday cake now? I laughed despite everything, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders.
Yeah.
We can definitely finish your birthday cake. We went inside and sat at the dining room table, just the two of us, eating chocolate cake in the golden afternoon light. The birthday decorations still hung from the ceiling, cheerful and bright, and for a moment it felt like we were celebrating after all. Mom, Marcus said around a mouthful of frosting. Yeah, I'm glad Dad came to see me, even if it made everyone upset. The simple honesty of it nearly broke my heart. Are you?
Yeah.
I missed him. I know he did bad things, but I still missed him. I reached across the table and took his hand. It's okay to miss him, buddy. It's okay to love people even when they've hurt you. That's what makes you a good person. Do you still love him? The question caught me off guard. I thought about James, about the man I'd married and the man he'd become, about the way he'd looked at Marcus today and the way he'd used our son's need for a father to manipulate his way back into our lives. I love the person he used to be, I said finally, and I love that he's part of you. But love isn't always enough to make a family work. Marcus nodded like he understood, though I wasn't sure how much a 9-year-old could really grasp about the complexities of adult relationships. We finished our cake in comfortable silence, and I helped him get ready for bed. As I tucked him in, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes. Mom, are we going to be okay? I kissed his forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of his skin. We're going to be better than okay, I promised. We're going to be free. After he fell asleep, I sat in my living room with my laptop, researching family law attorneys and financial fraud specialists. The insurance papers were spread across my coffee table like evidence in a crime scene, which I suppose they were. My phone buzzed with a text from David, my divorce lawyer. Heard from James today. We need to talk ASAP. This changes everything. Another text, this one from my sister Sarah. Mom told me what happened. You're making a huge mistake trusting James. Call me. And finally, one from my mother. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I love you and Marcus more than my own life. Please don't let this destroy our family. I set the phone aside without responding to any of them. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming what had been stolen from us. I would figure out how to navigate James's return and what it meant for our future. I would decide whether to press charges against my own family or try to find some other path forward. But tonight, I was going to sit in my quiet house and listen to my son breathing peacefully in his room, and I was going to plan how to build the life we deserved. A life where no one could manipulate us or steal from us or walk out on us when we needed them most. A life where we were finally, truly free. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening quiet, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, solid hope that tomorrow could be different than today. That we could be different than we'd been. The birthday decorations still hung from our ceiling, and in the lamplight they looked less desperate and more defiant. Like a declaration that we were worth celebrating, worth fighting for, worth protecting. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed it was true.